Thank you, and welcome everyone to this 46th NIPO Academy about a new feature, simulate interviews. The original plan for this academy was to talk about all the debugging methods that Nfield offers and then introduce the simulate interviews, but we slightly scaled it down to talk only about the new feature because that original academy became way too big. We already run this academy yesterday once, and only talking about the simulate interviews, that almost took an hour. I slightly changed some of the presentation, so I hope we be a bit quicker today. So yeah, only about the new feature simulate interviews today. So we have a string of academies planned for this spring. The simulate interview, which is the one we are doing now. Next week, we will run an academy about reporting. We already had an academy about the fieldwork report that is present in Nfield. We will look at that later slightly in light of the simulate interviews. This will be about how to create a BI report using the repositories of Nfield. Then the week after that, we will have an academy about another new command, the request command. Then the week after that, we will have an academy about survey access, how to limit access to surveys to only those people within your domain that need access to that survey. That is a feature that is available in Nfield for quite a while, but the configuration of that feature needed the API, and we now have also disclosed that to the manager. And then finally, we had an academy about how to end interviews. And we already said at that point, probably wise if we have an academy, a sister academy about that, how to start interviews, and that will be the last of our spring academies. So that's quite some academies we have planned. Let's start with this one, simulate interviews. Let's take a short look at the agenda. We'll shortly talk about why we simulate, why we should simulate data. Then we'll go into a demo where I will both show the old way of doing this, which is dummy data, and the new way that we have introduced, which is to simulate interviews. Then after the demo, we'll shortly do a recap about the dummy data, the simulate interviews, recap about how the rollout of this new feature is going to be, what the limitations of that new feature is, and which will be solved and which will not be solved, or at least not anytime soon. And then finally, as always, we have time for questions. So what did I do? Why simulate interviews? Well, there are basically two reasons. You simulate interviews to check your survey, and you simulate it so that you have data so you can set up reporting before fieldwork starts. And check the survey basically means you can use the data you simulate to check your routing, and you can check the quota filling. Quota filling, I do not mean that you then check whatever your targets are filling up. You check whatever you have connected your script correctly to your quota frame. And set up reporting before fieldwork starts, well, that becomes more and more important, because more and more it gets important that you actually do your reporting as soon as possible, preferably while fieldwork is still going on. And that really means that you have to have your reporting pipeline completely set up the moment fieldwork starts. And that means that you need a data set that more or less represents the sort of data that you expect to gather during your fieldwork. So this is why simulate interviews. Now, let's now do the demo, and let's take a look how we did that using the old method, and then immediately compare that with how we will do that using the new feature. So For the old method, that was done in Nfield Manager, which should, or in the Odin Developer, which I seem to have closed. So in the Odin Developer, let's simply open a survey. I prepared a whole range of demo surveys. The one we'll use first is this one, dummy data 1Q. It's a very short survey. There's one question with 5 answers, another question with 5 answers, and then a third question, which is an alpha question with length 15, which is under filter of both Q1 and Q2. This question will only be asked if the second code and was answered in 1 and the fourth code in 2. And then we have one last question to have a marker on where the data ends. So if we wanted to use this, if we wanted to generate data in the old method, what we will be doing is in the Odin Developer, we go to generate dummy data, and then we need to say how much. So let's say we do 100, click OK, and it will generate some data. Let's take a look at that data. So let's open data file, and it has generated in the same place as where the Q file resides. It has generated a closed answer file. So let's open that one. And so what we see here, the first 61 positions, those are standard. That's those are system fields. And then in the next 2 positions are the answers to these 2 questions. So that is question 1 and question 2. And then question 3 should only be answered if we actually have a 2 and a 4 in those questions. And we can very easily now check if that routing is correct. We don't have any answers here. We do have answers here, and we have a 2 and a 4 here. So yeah, that is correct. We have a 2 and a 4 here, 2 and a 4 here, etc., etc. Everywhere where we actually have data, we have a 2 and a 4. So this is a very easy way to check that your routing is actually working. Now, let's immediately step out this and let's go to the manager and let's see how we do the same thing using the new method. And then we will slowly go in what else that new method can do, which the dummy data generator actually cannot do. So let's go to the Nfield manager and let's create a survey. Going to simulate some data for the academy in that survey. So I'm calling that survey just that. It's an online interview. Create the survey. I need to upload the script. I will use the exact same script as I was using for in the developer. So that's the dummy data 1Q. Save this one. And I need to do one more thing before I can start generating data. I need to go to test and launch. As you can see here already is the simulate interviews, but it's grayed out because we need to publish this. It needs to be published because we are running real interviews here. And you can only run real interviews if you have published your Q file and whatever other settings that you have configured. So once published, we can actually start simulating those interviews. So we can now click here. Wants to know how many we want to generate. The maximum number is 500. There's a maximum number here because, as I said, this is creating real interviews, which means it is using real interview resources. So we need to be a bit smart here and not run very many interviews, because that will be very expensive and will probably at some point start interfering with the real field work, which we definitely don't want. We feel that 500 should be more than enough. Previous we run 100, so let's run 100 here again. And let's enable reporting. I will talk shortly about the other features here, but for now, let's enable reporting so we can see how that looks like too. So that's it. We can start the simulation. And it's busy now. And when it's done, it will actually throw up an effort here. And if you go to the activities is out of the way, then you will see that the simulation is ready and that we can view the simulation. So let's take a look at the simulation. That opens a new part in the developer. It lands on the general tab, which we will change shortly. So next time, in a few days, when you click on this, it will actually land on the monitor fieldwork, which is more informative because that will actually tell you what has been done in this simulation. And as you can see, 100 interviews have been generated. Before I continue, let me very quickly go to reporting and let me start something there that will take a few moments. Actually create the reporting, and let's then talk a little bit more. Monitor fieldwork. We'll go back to reporting once that has been created. As you can see, 100 interviews has been created. If we go to sample, you can also see that the sample file is actually being filled. So we have 100 entries in the sample. They're all successful. They all have response code 1. They all have response code 18. Let's go back to reporting, hopefully. Yeah, this has been finished. So let's take a look at the fieldwork overview, because as I said, one of the things what we can do is check your filtering. And using that reporting tool, let's go to cross tables. We'll see question 1, question 2 here. So let's quickly cross that with question 3. And as you can see, there's only one, and indeed, that one has an answer for 2 and 4, and there's nothing else. So that is a very quick way using the reporting to check that this filter is indeed working. You don't have to necessarily use this reporting. There is still the old data method. If I go to monitor fieldwork, I can download the data. And if I do that, that will create a download as always. And I can download that data, open it, and if I look at the .dot file, this is precisely what the ODIN developer will give you with that one answer here, and indeed 2 and 4 answered before. So you can either choose whatever you want to use the reporting to check on that filtering, or use the old method, just look at the .dot file, or use that .dot file in whatever reporting tool you are using to do this. So this is the same as in the developer. Now, there are also new things in this feature. In the developer, because it is offline, it doesn't know any quota. This, as I said, is running real interviews. It's running them online. So you can actually use the quota here. So I prepared an example of that. Let's see, this one, which is the same quota 1. Let's first go to that survey. Perhaps this is also a good time to explain the we have a list of surveys. This is the list of all the surveys that are in here. And I went to the simulations by clicking on the link here in the activities, but there's also a link here where you can directly go, and that will give you a list of all the surveys currently in your domain where a simulation has been done on. For now, let's first go to this list, and let's actually go to the sim quota, which has a quota, and let's take a look at the setup. So this has quota, very simple quota, male and age, and it's pulling in through a questionnaire, which is the sim quota queue. It's filling in that quota. Okay. Okay. That's nice. That's an update going live at this moment. We changed the password policy that you have to have a strong password in the manager and that you can no longer have a weak password. And obviously I am locking in with a weak password, and it has now in the middle of this demo decided that I need to change that password. So nice. Change password.
You have to go to the strongest, Frank. So 12 characters.
Yeah. It means that I now have to. Okay. Let's continue. Where were we? Quota. So we have there is a very simple queue file. I will not show you that. That is simply filling the quota. Instead of that, let's run this and let's take a look at what will happen if we simulate interviews for this. I will not enable reporting on this because we only want to take a look at the quota. So I will generate 100 interviews and I will start the simulation. Wait it to finish. So view the simulation. Go to monitor field work and then to quota. As you can see, we have 51. We have 51 done, 20 successful. Yeah, okay. I need to press F5 because I was too soon, and it will now say I have 100 interviews. 20 of them successful and 81 of them screened out because the stratification was full, which already shows you that the quota is working nicely. And here you can see the quota file has filled up, and I simulated 100 interviews, which is a bit stupid because I only want 20. But anyway, this is just to show that the quota file is working. So how could we use this? As I said, you should not use this to actually check if your quota fillings are correct. If you have doubts about how that works, you should read the manuals and you should do a training. You should not use this as some sort of hacking tool to figure that out. That is going to generate way too many interviews. But the one way you could use this is to actually check if you have connected your quota variables and your quota labels in the script correctly with the quota frame. Now, I also prepared an example of that. So let's take a look at that. which is the sim quota error, as the title suggests. This one has an error. So immediately to see that, let's again go to simulate interviews. This time, let's simulate only 20 because it's using the same quota frame and the same targets. Because I'm 20, it's also done a bit sooner. Let's view the simulation again. Let's go to monitor fieldwork, the quota. And here we can see that we indeed have a problem in this quota frame because one of the quota cells isn't filling. This is actually a problem that happens quite a lot in field work. We notice there are quite a lot of surveys that are being stopped after a few hours because someone notices that one of the quota cells isn't filling. And that is usually because the reason why it isn't filling here either, if we go to set up surveys and we'll download the survey file and we open that survey in the Odin Developer, we'll see that we actually made a spelling mistake here. And that is the reason why that quota isn't filling. So using this, you can very easily spot any connection problems between your script and the quota. This means that we should no longer be needed to stop the field work after a few hours because somebody made a spelling mistake, one of the quota variables. That is something that we can now very easily spot before we start field work. So that's the quota. All the quota features actually work in the simulation. So that is including the least filled quotas. I prepared an example of that too. I will not go into too many details. I will simply run that example once. And this is an example where we have different versions for a survey. If we let's go to the list. Let's actually go to the survey first. So this is the random version selection. You go to setup and quota. I have 4 different versions for this survey, and in this I am randomly selecting which version someone gets without checking anything. Now let's see what that means if I run a simulation on this one. Simulate interviews here. We do 100. Again. Wait until it's finished. It's finished now. Do the simulation. Let's immediately go to sample, to monitor fieldwork, sorry, and quota. And as you can see, yeah, it more or less did it randomly assigned surveys. It's not 25 for each because it's randomly. So yeah, it's not 25 precisely. Now, sometimes clients find this to be problematic, which is a bit strange because random is random, and yeah, that means that it's not always precisely 25, but sometimes it really is needed that this is precisely 25. And in those cases, we do the least filled quota. So I did the same thing. The same. Let's again go to least filled list and then go to the least filled quota version selection. It's using the same quota file version A, B, C, D, but instead of randomly selecting one of these, I actually use the least filled, which means that the first time it's selecting someone, it's randomly choosing one of these, and then the time after that, it's randomly choosing one of the 3 remaining. The time after that, randomly choosing one of the 2 remaining, then the one which hasn't been chosen, and then it starts again in that cycle. So let's do this. Let's simulate these interviews as well. Again, we do 100. Start the simulation. And this time, because we are using least filled quota, we expect that it should be nicely into 25, 25, 25. And let's view this simulation as well. To monitor field work. Okay, monitor field work quota. And as you can see, nicely 25, 25. This is just to show that all the quota features are working, including the least filled. One thing that I forgot to point out, so let me do that now. Remember, we have 25, 25, 25 here. Let's go to the list and let's do the same one, which is the least filled quota version selection. And we'll do a new setup. And we'll run a new simulation for this one as well. This time we'll just do 8. Start the simulation again. So remember, we had 25, we now did 8. And if I view the simulation, you might expect to see 27, 27 in the field work, but you won't. What you will see is 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. So that's one thing to remember. You cannot put a simulation on top of another simulation. You will only get the data of the last simulation you run. It will override the previous simulation. Okay, so that's the quota. The quota is working, which is nice and is already better than our old method in the Odin Developer. Now, the other thing that we can do here, because this is online and we are running this in the manual, it actually knows the sample too. So if we have a survey that is depending on a value that is pushed in the survey through the sample, we can actually use that one too in the simulate interviews. You can't in the dummy data in the developer, but you can do that using this new feature. I prepared an example of that too. So let's first, actually now I need to, let's very simple, very quickly take a look at the script, which is the sample data script. We have one variable which is called section, which is sample data, as you can see. So this one is taken from the sample table. And if that section is A1, this is the question we ask. If it is A2, this is the question, etc., etc. For each section, we have a new question and then one final question, which is a question for all. So those are the different questions we ask depending on the variable in the sample table. Let's take a look if this is indeed working, because I did one which is the sim test sample data, which is, this one is started. So this one, we are not running simulated interviews on this one, because you cannot run simulated interviews on started interviews. But we are using this one to actually take a look what will happen if we run a real interview. So let's take a look in the sample. Then let's take one that is not being used already. So let's say we'll take respondent key 127, and that has section A2. So let's run an interview for respondent key 127, and that should start 127, and that should start the question for section A2, and it does. And then we have one final question for all, and all the other ones are skipped. Now, we can also simulate interviews for this. What I will do here, I will again create an entire new survey, and I will upload the sample to that new survey. So create a survey and simulate sample for the Academy. Online survey, click create, upload the script. We'll use the same script as here, so that is the sample data queue. So that is this script. Save that script and we'll upload some sample here. This is the sample we will be uploading. And this is the same sample as we are using in the script I saw previously. I showed you previously, only the sample isn't used at all. It's clear. Okay. Need to publish the survey, enable to create simulated interviews, and let's simulate. Let's say we simulate 20 interviews, and we say you should use sample from the original survey. Start the simulation. Simulation. Should be ready. Okay, let's view the simulation. And if I then go to monitor field work, it will say I've done 20 successful interviews. And if I click on sample, you will see it has used the sample. Now, did it really do this? Easiest way to show that is to download the data. No, not sample records. You want to download the real data, the closed answer file. Take a very short look at that file. Oh, this is still the wrong one. Data download, yeah. Download. And then the dot file. And what you expect to see is in the dot file is exactly this. The first one are about A1, then we have a few about A2, then C1, etc., etc. So yeah, it has exactly used the sample from the sample file, the sample from the survey. Okay. Last thing. Oh yeah, you might wonder. We look at the sample. There are only 20 in the sample. So you might wonder what happens if I request 25 surveys. Well, let's actually do that because we only have 20 in the sample. Well, let's actually do that, see what happens. So go to simulate interviews again. We'll say use the sample from original survey. This point, I like to point out, you can also upload sample. If you upload sample, you are actually uploading sample for this particular simulation. So it will use that sample for that simulation. I will not demo that because it doesn't change anything. Simply is then using the data that you upload for that particular simulation, and it's not using the sample from the original survey. This time we're still using the sample from the original survey, only 20 in those. So I request 25 now. Let's see what happens. Okay, it's ready. And now for the first time, we have a red arrow here, which indicates that there is an error log. So let's download that error log. And yeah, well, that's clear. You requested 25 interviews, but there are only 20 sample records. So I have only 20 have been done, and the other 25 have been ignored. So this is what happens if there is some sort of a problem. It will actually create an error log and clearly tell you what the problem is and what has been done and what has not been done. So we talked about the quota, we talked about the sample. Now, last thing to talk about is how you can actually steer a bit in this simulating data. Why is that important? Now, to show you why that is important, let's step back to the Odin Developer, and let's actually run let's run some dummy data, but then for a particular survey that I have created. Let's see if I have already loaded it. I have not. Then I will back here, and it should be the dummy data 2 queue. So now, what survey is this? This is a survey where I actually do some screenouts before I start the real survey. There are several screenouts here. We'll start with one where we ask, have you participated in market research in the last month? Yes, you are screened out. No, you can continue. If you can't remember, you are screened out too. Then the next question, do you work in any of these areas? And we are only interested in people that do not work in any of those 4 areas. So only if you answer 9, this interview, you will not be screened out. Then we have the age question. And again, we are interested in a very particular age group. We don't want people younger than 21 because it might be a survey about alcoholic drinks. So you cannot talk to these people. We don't want anyone older than 40. That's not the group we're looking after. So again, we are screening out lots of people here that do not belong in the correct age group. And then we have a final question, which is brand awareness. And again, we do some clever screening out here. We are checking if people know the first 3 brands, and our requirement is that people should at least know 2 of those first 3 brands, because those are the main brands, and we only are interested in people that know at least 2 of those main brands. And if they don't know 2 brands, again, they are screened out. And then finally, we start a survey. This is not much of a survey. It's just a repeat of 50 to get some data in here. So we have a clear marker in the data file, whatever someone reads this point or not. This isn't, it's a tough screening, but it's not completely outlandish. But it's not outlandish. For market research, it is quite normal that we don't want to talk to people who are permanently filling in surveys. It's very common that we don't want to talk to people who are working in advertisement, in market research, in journalism, or in the industry where the survey is about. That we have some requirements on age, also not that normal. That we have some requirements on brand knowledge, also not that strange. So this is not a very outlandish screening. What happens if I start the dummy data here? The dummy data will randomly assign answers to this. So at least 1/3 of the answers will be yes, 1/3 of the answers will be can't remember, and only 1/3 will be no. So at this point, if we start randomly assigning data, it will already screen out two-thirds of the dummy data. In practice, this will be different because most people will not have done a survey the last month. But as soon as we start running dummy data, 1/3, we will lose 2/3 of our started interviews on the first question. Now, let's actually do this and see what happens. So Odin will generate the dummy data. Say we do 500. Click OK. I think 500 interviews, so it's taking a bit longer. And then again, we'll open the data file. It's the second one. Okay, now let's see what actually happens. As again, the first 61 are the standard positions. You can see the columns here. And then we have first a question, which is, in what branch do you work? It needs to be no, so it needs to be 2 to continue. Everyone else, every 9 is screened out. So as I already said, 2/3 do not make it beyond this question. Then we have one question where you should answer 9 and otherwise you're screened out. So that is where we lose a lot of people. And then we have a question about the 8s. This one is coming through, which is 29, but then there is the branch. And this one doesn't know the first 3 brands. So this one is finally screened out. So even if you come here, you are still screened out. So let's continue downwards. Continue downwards. Yeah, this is the first successful interview. So that's one. We run 500 interviews. We have 1 successful interview. So what you really want here is that you want to steer in this random assignment of answers. You want to steer in here so that we actually get more successful interviews than we have now. This is not possible using the dummy data in the developer, but this is possible in the simulate interviews. So let's see how that would work. Let's first actually go back to the Nfield manager. I prepared a survey which is called survey list screen out setup. This is using the same questionnaire as I used for the dummy data. I only changed the screen outs from end NGB in end STs, so we can actually have an overview in the monitor field work which actually screen outs were used. Very quickly to show you what that means. I have not opened that file either. It's the dummy data to Nfield queue. So instead of end NGB, we have an end status 501. If you have participated in market research in the last one, 502. If you are working in the, if we don't want to talk to people with that occupation, then we have 503 if you're too young, 504 if you're too old, and 505 finally if you don't know enough brands. So that is the only change I made in this. Let's actually do this. Let's keep the survey online. So what we would want to do here, preferably before running, is that we want to assign probabilities to these answers. And as you can guess, that is possible in the interview simulator. So let's take a look how that is done. For that, I will open Notepad 2.2. I will open Notepad because it is done using JSON format. And Notepad 2.2 gives a nice format of JSON. The one we have here is the screen out prevention. We have a description of how this format actually works. I will not go over that because that is quite useless in an academy. It will be part of the documentation. So you can read up on that documentation. For now, let's simply see for this particular survey what it precisely is that we are doing. So let's have the JSON screen with the probability, what the answer probabilities here. And let's have the survey here where we actually see the questions and what we want to do. So question 1, which is this one, Q1. The answers are 1, 2, or 9, 1, 2, or 9, and we assign a weight of 5 to answer 1, a weight of 50 to answer 2, and a weight of 1 to answer 9, which basically means for every 50 answers of 2, there should be 5 with set 1 and 1 that's set 9. This is not a given, this is still probability, so the actual detailed result might be different, but this is the weight we give to it. So we will see way more answers no than the other ones. Then we have the second one, which is the advertisement. Again, we want to have the highest weight to 9 to make sure that most people actually get past this question. Again, we'll do that here. Then we have the 8th question, same answer. We want most of the 8s. We want most of the weight to be in the group that we actually want to continue, and lower weights for the next one. And then finally, we have question 4. Do you know any of these brands? And again, we want a high probability for the first 3 brands and lower probabilities for the next brands. So that is the probabilities that we created at forehand. Let's see how this works. Again, as I said, detailed of how the exact structure of this is will be in the documentation. It doesn't make much sense for me to go over that in this academy. Let's go to survey. So we have the survey. We'll want to run a simulate interview here. And this is where we have what we call the hint file, the upload hints. So let's click that, and that will then actually be that JSON file that I just shown you, which is the screened out prevention. I called that one. Let's open that one. Nice, it's valid, so it's using that. And let's create 100 interviews. Let's not create 500. Let's create 100. It will be a bit slower because it's using those hints to push in those answers. So it will take a little bit more time to run these 100 interviews. Do we have any questions at this point, Art?
No, all clear so far. There was one question about whether we would share the demo files later.
Yeah, let's talk about it later. Well, let's talk about it now. I don't think it makes much sense to share the demo files. They are very particular. They are very easily we can share them, but they're very straightforward. Okay, the activities is ready, so let's take a look at the simulation. And sample, no monitor field work. Why am I always going to sample? So actually, you see, we have 33 successful. So we have created only 100 here instead of 500, and we already have 32 more successfuls than in the 500 of those ones. We can still see there are still 9 people being rejected because they are working because they have done a interview already in the last month. Still, some people rejected because they're working, because their occupation is not what we want. 2 people too young, 70 too old. Still a lot of people rejected because of the brands, but that is what you would expect in the real survey as well. That is probably the one where most of people will be screened out. So this looks like pretty convincing data. Okay, this concludes the demos. So let's return to the presentation. Let's show from the current slide. So to recap, the dummy data runs offline. That is the old way in the NIPO ODIN Developer. It runs offline. It does not know the sample data. It does not know the quota. It's rather dumb. As you can see, it's just pushing in random data without any way to steer that data. One thing that we did not talk about, but that you should realize, it does not know the template either. So if you either use the Nfield Chicago template or some custom template from your company, it doesn't know the template. So if there is logic in that template, it cannot execute that template because it doesn't know the template. Simulate interview, well, we looked at it. It runs online. It does know the sample data. It does know the quota. You can make it smart by actually assigning probabilities to those answers. It still does not use the template. So that problem remains. If you run a template and you run a question where some of the logic in that question is heavily depending on things that happens in that template, that will not be picked up by the simulator. That's something that you still have to keep remembering. Remarks. As said, the templates will not be used. Buttons cannot be filled using that hints file. That will be fixed. The hints will be further extended, as you might already gathered from what I've shown you. If you have a very long list of codes and you want to fill in probabilities for each of those codes, that could become quite a bit bothersome. One of the extensions will be that you can group things and then assign probabilities to those groups. The simulated data can also be downloaded using the API. That makes sense that is possible, because one of the reasons is that you want to check your data pipeline, and that data pipeline will in most cases will be automated, so we'll be using the API. So it makes sense that you can download that data through the API as well. The simulate interviews is also available for KP. I only showed online, but if you create KP surveys, that button to simulate interviews will be there as well, but it's still running in the Nfield manager. So the same as in test interviews, it will run online interviews. If you want to use the simulate interviews right now, if you think, yeah, this is very nice, I'll have an immediately use for this, you can write to your help desk and we will enable it for you. And otherwise, this feature will be enabled on all domains before the end of April. We are still fixing some things. And when that is done, it will be enabled before the end of April, probably a few weeks earlier than that. And any last questions?
No questions, Frank.
Good. Then the final remarks recordings, as always, available later this week. The manuals will be updated before we release this to everyone, and that manual will have a complete explanation on how that hint file, what the exact format of that hint file is. Feature will be live, well, not in the next update. It will be live before the end of this month. That might be the next update, but that's not a guarantee yet. Yeah. If you have a suggestion for a topic for an academy, please write to your help desk and we will take that into consideration. And as said, next academy next week about reporting. One final check for questions.
No, not a question, but an addition. Yesterday I got a message from somebody that the new invitation for the next academy session was not received yet. That is true. We will send that later this week, probably tomorrow.
Okay, good. All right, then thank you for your attention and talk to you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.